Reports of Iranian retaliation are coming in after the U.S. and Israel launched a major combat operation against the Islamic Republic that included strikes on Tehran. AP correspondent John Gambrell is covering this story for CNA, and he joins us live from Dubai. John, thank you for joining us. What's the latest on this developing story? What do we know of the damage in Iran and Israel?
Well, as of right now, it's unclear just how much damage has been done in Tehran since these early morning strikes that began with Israel and the United States targeting military infrastructure, government buildings, and other sites in the country. We have seen some footage on Iranian state television showing rescuers going through the rubble there. One of the first strikes appeared to target a compound home to Iran's 86-year-old supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, in the time since, we have seen the Iranians launch what they describe as their first wave of attacks targeting Israel. The sound of air defense missiles could be heard going off in northern Israel as well as in Jerusalem. It's not clear if there's been any real damage there, though. Now, in the last hour or so, we have seen the Iranians widen their retaliation, starting to target American military bases in the wider Middle East like they threatened they would. We have seen explosions reported in Kuwait and Qatar, home to, respectively, the U.S. Army's headquarters in Kuwait, as well as the U.S. Air Force's headquarters and the U.S. Central Command's wider headquarters in Qatar, the Al Udeid Air Base. And we've also seen, according to the Bahrainis, the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain also targeted by military fire. We don't have any information yet about any damage or casualties there, but it just goes to show just how wide and how quick this conflict has turned into a regional quagmire.
John, Iran is a major player in the Middle East and it has proxies. How serious is the risk of regional escalation?
So far, we have heard from at least one of these Iranian proxies. The Iranians refer to it as their axis of resistance. Yemen's Houthi rebels, you may remember back a few months ago that they had been launching attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden over the Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip. Well, we've heard from two officials there that say they're going to restart their maritime attacks on shipping there. That is going to have a knock-on effect as Egypt relies heavily on revenue it generates from the Suez Canal, which is the connection between the Mediterranean Sea and Europe, onward into the Red Sea and the Middle East. So there's already some business consequences as well. It's not trading today, but oil prices also are expected to rise as well because of any sort of threat to this region. And while these attacks are still ongoing, it remains unclear just how severe they will be. But we have seen airspace shut down here in the United Arab Emirates, where I am. They've closed their airspace already. And the UAE is home to both the long-haul carriers Emirates and Etihad, meaning that east-west travel globally is going to be affected by this conflict.
John, aside from the airspace, what could this conflict mean for other Middle Eastern states, particularly those that are not aligned with Iran, such as Qatar?
Well, it's hard to know at this point, but the wider Middle East has basically been sort of on the edge. You know, we had the Israel-Hamas war that started back with the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. Then we had the Israelis just go country by country and just attack any of these allies of Iran, whether that be Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in the middle in the Gaza Strip, as well as the Houthis, and even Iran itself when Israel launched that 12-day war against the country back in June that saw the Americans come in and bomb those enrichment sites. So, shutting down airspace, disrupting the flow of travel, disrupting oil supplies, disrupting global trade. The UAE is also home to Jebel Ali, one of the biggest ports in the world. And, all this stuff will have an effect on the economy and the wider region.
Well, many thanks for that update. AP correspondent John Gambrell reporting for CNA in Dubai. Thank you. Now, earlier, my colleague Paul Sung spoke with an expert on the Middle East who shares his insight on what this escalating situation will mean for the region and beyond.
I think all indications suggest that President Trump intends to bring the regime down. That's what he's been suggesting. In fact, he did suggest that even last year. He threatened the regime that he knew where the leadership lived, he knew where they were, and they should watch out. Now he is delivering on his promise and has talked about decapitating the regime. He's even talked about, urging Iranian population to rise up and bring the regime down, which is a very irresponsible thing to say to a population that is already bashed and bruised and completely, first of all, alienated from the regime, but also brutalized by the regime.
Now, from Israel's perspective, they say that its strikes were preventive and aimed at regime and military sites, including ballistic missiles. What is Israel trying to change on the ground right now?
Well, the idea that this was a preventative strike against an imminent attack is fictitious. Everybody knows that Iran and the United States were in talks over Iran's nuclear program, that in fact Iran had agreed to giving up on its uranium enriched stockpile. And that was a first. Even the Obama deal, JCPOA, did not achieve that. So the fact that these talks were ongoing, and on Monday there was scheduled to be a meeting of a technical meeting to look at the practicalities of that deal, tells me that this is simply a political decision made in Tel Aviv and Washington to basically bring down the regime, regardless of the nuclear issue.
Now, Iran says it's preparing a crushing response. What could that look like?
Well, the regime in the past, we had this scenario happening in June last year. And June last year, Iran quite carefully calibrated its strike against United States. It hit Israel, but against the United States, it only hit a military facility near Doha in Qatar, and reports suggest that there was even advance warning that it was doing it in order to minimize U.S. casualties. But now, in this instant, where we have clear signals from Israel and from the United States that they are aiming to bring the regime down, this presents an existential threat to the regime, which means that the authorities in Iran are unlikely to be careful and calibrate their response. I suspect they would feel completely with back against the wall and respond as harsh as they can.
Now, from your perspective, Professor, how does this latest round of U.S. and Israeli strikes change stability across the wider Middle East? Which countries or flashpoints are most at risk of being pulled in next?
Well, of course, you recall that regional leaders were urging President Trump not to take the military option. The Saudi Arabian government, Qatari government, UAE even. UAE has had a difficult relationship with Iran, but even the United Arab Emirates, they were asking the United States not to take the military option because everyone was concerned of the regional implications of war. The very first thing that Iran can do, and it has threatened it would do, is to close the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of oil from the region goes to global market. That would be devastating for the economy of those oil-producing states in the region, but also for the global economy. So that's the very first thing. And then there are, of course, various Shia militia groups, very active in Iraq. You have Houthis in Yemen. So there is possibility that those militia groups and other actors will take it upon themselves to get back at U.S. assets. And that would be seriously destabilizing for the region.
Now, Professor, should that happen, if this conflict spreads, do you see China backing Iran, and how far would Beijing be willing to go, you think?
I think both China and Russia, given that they have close ties with Iran, would barrack for Iran at the United Nations Security Council, at various international fora, and highlight and point to the illegality of the attack on Iran under international law, because there was no threat coming from Iran. This was completely preemptive, or completely, no justification for the attack. As a result, I think there would be a lot of diplomatic pressure put on Trump and put on Israel, but I don't expect that China or Russia would go beyond the diplomatic response.
And this is a developing story. We'll bring you more details as they emerge right here on CNA. You can also check our website, cna.asia, for our live coverage.